Welcome everyone to this ECOSOC Partnership Forum Spotlight session on education for all as a key step of the recovery. Welcome to those who are joining via Zoom and those who are joining also via the Bofah platform. We were just having a little discussion beforehand, working out how to best connect with all of you who are joining us and who wish to contribute to the conversation. We're looking forward to having a lively discussion with you all. This is a joint spotlight session, which has been put together by a number of different organizations working together very much in the spirit of partnerships, including the NGO Major Group, the Africa Regional Mechanism for Major Groups and Other Stakeholders, the Indigenous Peoples Major Group, the Education and Academia Stakeholder Group Together 2030, and also the National Planning Development Commission of Ghana. Welcome once more. I hope you can hear me well. As you may be aware, in terms of this session on education, I hope people can hear me. I understand that the connection is a little bit patchy. Apologies. Hopefully it's stronger now. To give a little bit of background to this session, we understand the impact of the COVID pandemic has created the most severe disruption to education in history, affecting nearly 1.6 billion learners in more than 190 countries across the world. The closure of schools and learning spaces has impacted 94% of the world's student population, and many of those are in low and lower middle income and middle income countries. So the impact has been particularly felt in those countries where already there were challenges in terms of access to education. And at the same time, education has been moving into the virtual world, increasingly using digital technology such as this to bridge the gaps. And as we see already, there is a digital divide, and there are times when technology is not as strong as we would like it to be. So today we'll be considering the impact of COVID on education as a whole, and looking in particular at some of those communities that are most often left behind, considering also how education can strengthen gender equality and anti-discrimination, and ensuring that all of those who should have access are able to access free education. We aim to provide different perspectives from different points of view around the world on the current challenges facing the education system, as well as considering some good practices on engaging stakeholders and resilient models for providing quality, free education for all, linking in to the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we have an excellent panel for you today, and I'm delighted to be here as your moderator. I'm Oli from the NGO Major Group and from Action for Sustainable Development. We'll be hearing shortly from Dr. Richard Osei Bofah, who joins us from the National Development Planning Commission in Ghana. We'll also be hearing from Avilinia Reyes García from the Network of Indigenous Youth of Latin America and the Caribbean. We'll be hearing from Rawan Abukhadrah from World Vision, the Syria Emergency Response, looking at the impact particularly in the Syria region. We'll also be hearing from Katarina Popovic from the International Council for Education, and from Hagar Monsif from Maat for Peace. And then, of course, Rosario, my colleague, Rosario Pilar Garavito, will be bringing things together and helping to guide the questions that you may have in the chat. So please do put your questions through the Bofah app so that we can ensure that we capture those. So to kick us off and to start the interventions, I'd like to turn to Richard, Dr. Bofah. You're a development economist. You've been working for many years looking at different models of development and how to strengthen that in the context of Ghana. We know that you are also the national coordinator for the SDGs in Ghana. Dr. Bofah, perhaps you can talk to us a little bit about what you've seen in terms of the impact of the pandemic on education in Ghana. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much. Let me quickly share my screen, if that is okay for you.
You should be able to now.
Yes, so to share some good practices on Ghana, and of course, in the context of COVID-19, I will take you through a brief introduction and then highlight some challenges prior to COVID-19, how it has been heightened by COVID-19 and best practices. So Ghana has been since 1960s and then 80s been pursuing free primary education, of course, strengthened with further intervention to ensure that not only is it free, but also compulsory. And of course, girl child education was very critical to the government. And we've seen recently, since 2017, government pursuing free senior high school to ensure that education is accessible to all. And but in spite of all these interventions and progress, we're still seeing that in terms of quality, there's still much to be left to be done. There are some disparities already in access to quality education at all levels between rural and urban, poor and rich households. We've seen the issue of infrastructure also being a challenge. Currently, we are running double track system because of the free SHS. Of course, many people are now moving to the educational sector system. So infrastructure is quite limited. So we are running a shift system now. We've also seen that the TV, which is also very core to the to our development agenda, had issues of quality and standardization, but currently government is working on that, and there's a reform taking place in that sector. So with the COVID impact, in the case of Ghana, all schools were closed actually. So we have about 9.2 million students at the basic, that means from primary, from below primary up to the high school level were all affected, and 0.5 million, that is 500,000 of teachers were also home. So that actually disrupted the entire, you can imagine this government, how to get these people ongoing. We saw that the COVID actually distorted the academic calendar in the case of Ghana in diverse ways. Very few schools were able to come out quickly out of that situation. And then in terms of government programs in the education sector, we saw reallocation from there towards dealing with the COVID-19 right. And one thing that we also observed was the vulnerability among women, where some teenage pregnancy were reported, and Henman was actually clear communities. Right. Now, so what did we do? So government actually introduced distant learning program and launched this, right, and roll up all these programs. So we observed that with this, there were more encouraging usage of mobile apps, and of course, watching of TV. So educational programs were run on this platform to reach everyone. That was the intention. So radio program was also ongoing, but we observed that about general was not engaged in any form of learning, while though this kind of program were ongoing, and that's what the disparity in access to educational infrastructure, the TV and other things. We also observed that, for example, if you look at 25% of basic children, school children did not even have access to computers or phones. So that actually heightened the disparities. So that's what happened. But Ghana has actually, going forward, prioritized ensuring that we enhance inclusive and equitable access to education and participation in quality education at all levels. So prior to COVID, this was the driving force, and that has been even been strengthened more at the Ministry of Education to ensure that much emphasis on strengthening the educational management system, so that well, one of the things we observed was that while teachers were trying to provide quality education through these platforms, even there was a challenge of the delivery method and the approach of this system. So there's emphasis on strengthening the management system and also ensuring that some source of funding. So this will ensure that we can actually build on the infrastructure we are looking for. Now, so currently the government came out with COVID-19 coordinated education response plan. So with this, so like going back
Richard,
to campaign,
Richard, if
all
we're losing you a little bit.
Fumigated and time and health safety were also at high level. So these programs were is it better now? Maybe can I turn off my video? Am I being heard?
Please go ahead, and please feel free to speak more slowly. We still have a few minutes. There's no need to rush.
Okay, all right. So so with this response plan, like I say, maybe let me start from me with the response plan. That was the time of COVID, and the ministry came out with this sharp interventions and initiatives to ensure that schools are fumigated very well, so that to encourage parents to send back their children to school. So it was going back to school campaign, and to ensure that the health conditions at various schools were also intact, and more awareness were given to school-going children, and of course parents, to assure them of their safety, the safety of their children. So these were done to ensure that going back to school was not actually a problem. Now we have all schools reopening in Ghana, and children are in school. So the fear has actually gone, indicating that policy actually worked for us here. Now, one of the things that government continue to emphasize
repaso. Y quisiera
is to continue implementing a free senior high school policy where everyone have opportunity to be in the senior high level. Of course, the policy now focusing more on looking at the quality aspect of it, because we have the numbers, but I want to now improve upon the quality so that it is more accepted by the Ghanaian population. And then in this context, we are also doing the model SHS senior high school, the model type where 42 districts are more or less looked at, so that we transform those educational system over there in terms of their classroom, dormitories, science laboratories and workshop into a high standard, so that whoever attends such schools will see it almost similar to any international standard. So in this same context of COVID, the government have to initiate the program of increasing the capitation grants. So with this one, it's more or less easing the burden on poor households, so that the fee they have to pay for certain facilities are catered for this grant. And that was done by 100%. You can multiply that by the entire population for the student. You could see there's a large number of expenses that the government was capturing. Now, you have also observed that even though while students were at home, there was school feeding program which provided food to poor households, children coming from poor households, still continue. In fact, about half of the children who were enjoying while they were in school kept on enjoying this system. So that was the government due to actually address the problem. Now, before ending, going forward, the government is actually looking at COVID and similar ones, and therefore putting in much infrastructure to ensure that we have a robust ICT system to support distance learning, particularly in the remote areas, as we observe in the course of the COVID, where vulnerable households were actually at, much vulnerable in that sense. And then, of course, coming out with an open university system where students can now afford this the face-to-face. So that was what is being done now. That is the emphasis. And of course, to strengthen the use of radio and TV system, right, in promoting education. And of course, looking at this, addressing the disparity by looking at the remote areas and see how we can bring them on board. And then government is actually in the process has also revamped the TVET, that is technical vocational education system, to ensure that it's revamped to be more or less a hub in the continent. So that's our goal. And we've started the process. There's a lot of reform going on at the TVET system to ensure that quality is actually enhanced. So if you ask me, one of what is motivating us is to build a resilient education system that is future ready to meet all similar related COVID-19 challenges. So I think this is where I may end my presentation and then open up for questions where there's a need.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much. And apologies to everyone joining us for some of the technical challenges. I think it highlights the digital access issues that we want to also cover in this session. And it's been both on my end and I think on Dr. Bofah's end. So apologies once more for those technical glitches, but hopefully we are all on board now. And I see we have a number of additional participants who joined us during that excellent presentation. And thank you so much, Dr. Bofah, also for highlighting the wider impact of school closures in terms of lack of access to healthy food, for example, and the economic impacts on families. I think you've highlighted that extremely well. Now, I wanted to highlight our next speaker will be speaking in Spanish. We do have interpretation on this call. For those of us who are on the Zoom platform, you should find the globe symbol at the bottom of your screen, and you should be able to choose your language preference. Avilinia Reyes García will be speaking now to us in Spanish. Avilinia, muy bienvenida. It's excellent to have your inputs at this point. Avilinia is a young indigenous Zapotec woman from the Sierra Norte of the state of Oaxaca in Mexico. She's also been very active as a co-founder of the collective Iranu, the Network of Indigenous Youth of Mexico City, and will be talking to us a little bit in terms of the indigenous cultural heritage and how to ensure that is also guaranteed in the education system. Avilinia, a usted, gracias.
Hola, buenas tardes. A esta mesa que se presenta el día de hoy, a la audiencia que nos acompaña. Me avisan, por favor, si hay algún problema con mi internet, si no me escuchan, para ver si puedo hacer algo. Como bien ya lo mencionó Lynn, soy indígena zapoteca del estado de Oaxaca, les gustaría compartirles sobre el acceso a la educación desde la mirada de los jóvenes indígenas y los retos que hemos enfrentado ante esta pandemia mundial llamada COVID-19. En cuanto al acceso a la educación para los jóvenes indígenas, no es un derecho garantizado en su totalidad, si bien está reconocido en la Declaración como un derecho universal. En el país no existen los mecanismos suficientes que permitan que las comunidades indígenas puedan acceder a este derecho, que gocemos de una educación de calidad y una educación multicultural. Desde la red de jóvenes indígenas identificamos que nuestras comunidades presentan un gran rezago educativo, ya que pocas escuelas a nuestras comunidades. Los jóvenes que desean acceder a una educación superior, ¿sí me escuchan? Sí, ¿verdad? Los jóvenes que desean acceder a una educación superior tienen que emigrar de sus territorios originarios para ir a las ciudades, y pues esto implica enfrentar una serie de dificultades, tales como acceder primeramente a la universidad. Para poder acceder a la universidad nos ponen en competencia con otros aspirantes, generando una desigualdad de oportunidades, ya que muchos de los jóvenes de las ciudades se encuentran pues con más preparación. Por otro lado está la pérdida de la identidad, es un riesgo latente que como jóvenes en un contexto de migración, ya que enfrentamos primeramente una serie de discriminación por uso de nuestra lengua, de nuestra vestimenta, indumentarias y la práctica de nuestra lengua. Por otro lado, recibimos una educación occidental. Al ingresar a las universidades en las ciudades, enfrentamos una educación occidental lejana a nuestra cosmovisión. Son pocas las universidades que cuentan con un modelo educativo intercultural que fortalezca la identidad de los jóvenes indígenas y que nos permita participar en condiciones de igualdad, tal como lo menciona justo el artículo 29 del convenio 169 de la OIT y la Declaración de los Derechos de los Pueblos Indígenas por parte de la ONU, que establece justo que los pueblos indígenas tienen el derecho a establecer y controlar sus sistemas, instituciones y docentes que permitan una educación en sus propios idiomas, en consonancia con sus métodos culturales de enseñanza y aprendizajes. Esto viene marcado en el artículo 14.1. En temas de salud y vivienda, además, los jóvenes que emigramos a las ciudades tienen que buscar una vivienda, un trabajo que les permita justo sostenerse mientras cursamos los estudios, y la mayoría de los trabajos a los que podemos acceder son precarizados, son de un sueldo muy bajo y de medio tiempo. Esto, pues, tenemos que buscar una fuente económica, un ingreso económico. Dentro de las problemáticas que los jóvenes indígenas hemos enfrentado durante la pandemia, pues está la suspensión de clases presenciales. La mayoría de los jóvenes tuvimos que regresar a nuestras comunidades y otros no corrieron con la misma suerte, se tuvieron que quedar en las ciudades ya que el acceso a sus comunidades se habían cerrado y no podían ingresar o el transporte era limitado. Las clases en modalidad virtual. Esto impide a los jóvenes indígenas continuar con sus estudios ya que la mayoría no cuenta con una señal estable de internet, como lo podemos ver ahora, o no cuentan con un equipo de cómputo. Tienen que pagar por un tiempo para que puedan hacer uso de un equipo o moverse de comunidad para poder acceder a la frecuencia, pues una brecha tecnológica que enfrentamos en las comunidades. El aumento de desempleo por la pandemia también es una de las problemáticas que enfrentamos los jóvenes. Muchos jóvenes indígenas perdieron sus trabajos porque en las ciudades empezaron a despedir a la mitad del personal porque ya no podían cubrir todos los gastos de todo el personal, o hicieron recorte de sueldos, pues esto impidió justo que pudieran como seguir sustentando o cubriendo sus necesidades. Pues esto también conlleva justo a una problemática de vivienda. Los jóvenes indígenas habían migrado a la ciudad por una educación y se enfrentan al riesgo de perder sus viviendas durante la pandemia, ya que los jóvenes que se quedaron sin empleo pues no podían pagar las rentas. En tema de salud, los jóvenes que se quedaron en las ciudades pues no cuentan con un seguro social. Muchos se encuentran solos, solos, no una familia en las ciudades, entonces pues es complicada la situación que enfrentan. Es por ello que desde la Red de Jóvenes Indígenas busca justo impulsar espacios y redes de apoyo y acompañamiento y convivencia para los jóvenes indígenas que se encuentran, busca fomentar justo el intercambio de nuestros saberes y se fortalezca nuestra identidad y la participación comunitaria desde una perspectiva de género, de derechos humanos y una perspectiva de interculturalidad, y brindar justo como herramientas que fortalezcan para su desarrollo personal y profesional. Y desde la Red de Jóvenes pues recomienda un trabajo paralelo con el Estado o con los estados, que pues es necesario crear mecanismos de educación intercultural que fortalezcan justo la educación con pertinencia cultural y garantizar el acceso a Internet pues vista como un derecho, ¿no? Además que las políticas internacionales deben de contemplar las problemáticas específicas de los jóvenes indígenas, porque para nuestras comunidades el tema de salud, de alimentación y otros temas pues impactan directamente en nuestro ejercicio pleno o goce pleno de este derecho que es el acceso a la educación. Pues esa sería como mi intervención. Les agradezco mucho la atención y si pues tienen dudas, comentarios, pues estaré atenta a ustedes. Gracias.
Gracias, Avilinia. Muchísimas gracias. I think you've highlighted very clearly some of the challenges and also some of the importance of guaranteeing rights and a rights-based approach, particularly those cultural rights that you've highlighted in terms of Indigenous peoples' cultural rights. Thank you so much for joining us. Next, we'll be hearing from Rawan Abukhadrah, who joins us from the World Vision Syria Emergency Response Team, and we're looking forward to hearing your experience and your contributions in terms of working in emergency settings with humanitarian organizations. I think you've highlighted that you look at the integration of education in the emergency and child protection moments and how we ensure that that is integrated into those humanitarian responses. So Rawan, over to you, please.
Thank you, Ollie. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Now we will be focusing more on integrated education and child protection in fragile contexts, and I will be focusing on Syria response. So as of March 2021, we marked a decade-long conflict in Syria and the impact war has had on children. At that time, we spoke to almost 400 Syrian displaced children who told us crystal clear what they want. They want peace. In addition to that, children called for access to education and psychosocial support so they can rebuild their lives and recover. This was their message to us as World Vision and to peer agencies. Due to the accumulated and combined safety and protection risks as a result of the ongoing war and what COVID-19 added to that, especially the effect on children's well-being, many adolescent girls and boys are now continuing their lives with disabilities and are struggling. They simply do not have sufficient coping capacity to face the wide range of challenges they have to survive every single day. Fadi, one of the boys who was affected by war and lost his ability to walk, he told us once, after visiting my grandmother's house, armed people broke into the house. I felt so scared at that moment and my legs gave in. I cannot walk to this day, but I have a great will to live. I love drawing and playing with my friends in World Vision Partners Center. They have provided an education opportunity and protection for children like me. This is the first time I go to school and have learned. This is what shared with us from 12 years old Fadi. And this is what I want to highlight in the upcoming minutes in an opening which is summarized like as I speech. Why I? Because this is how we work in World Vision, by making our work part of our life, to be there standing for the most vulnerable children as much as we can. And in the I speech, I would highlight two concepts, integration and inclusion. It is a common misconception that young children do not understand stressful or violent events and so are not as affected as adults. But their young minds process much more than is often credited. As World Vision, we often observe this in the children affected by crisis that we serve. Due to the harmful events they experience, their developmental milestones can be delayed, their capacity for higher education fulfillment is threatened, and their behavior, emotional attachments, and social environment are also impacted. This is why an integrated approach is important. When you are integrating protection with education, you are making education and the children involved in is safer and more protected by either preventing or responding to the risks and concerns that they may face. You are likely to see benefit on child well-being and educational outcomes. And this goes to all the learning levels, even in the early stages, as we are having one of the amazing projects here in Jordan, specifically in Azraq camp, where we advocate for the integrated approach and having protection in the Peace Center integrated with the Early Childhood Education and Development Center, as we work with both children and caregivers to advocate for protecting children and stop the negative coping mechanisms that could go in multiple forms and summarized with pushing the children for child labor or early marriage. It's worth mentioning here that this approach is best implemented when you are considering a holistic perspective of working with formal and informal elements of a children's system, including caregivers, governments, and other stakeholders. On the other hand, And speaking about that specific place, we started to look deeper into inclusion. In December 2021, we were able to be part of leading a barrier analysis focusing on children with disabilities, and we learned a lot from this exercise. For example, parents and caregivers who benefited from a support from surrounding network and being able to talk to parents whose children were facing similar disabilities were encouraged to send their children to school, while others were simply afraid to do that. And that's what leads us to think again how integrated protection and education will enable us to do a lot, starting with working with caregivers to raise their awareness, to protect their children, and build the capacities of the teachers too, to cover the needs of all children despite their abilities, and going further to enable these teachers to safely identify and refer children to other services they may need. In general, what we are looking at, and we could ask through this panel, is donors and the humanitarian actors must expand mental health and psychosocial support programs for children and include these as an important element across education, child protection, and health sectors, as well as integrate MHPSS as a core component of durable solution frameworks. The level of violence witnessed and suffered by the children of Syria is massive. While children's resilience can be remarkable, without adequate support, they may face significant effects on their future health and well-being. From the other hand, and lastly, governments need to be supported in the implementation of national policy measures that help to ensure the continued education of vulnerable children and youth, especially those with disabilities, and include caregivers in all of these steps, even the supportive network inside the camps and in the hard-to-reach areas, including host community, internal displaced personnel, and refugees. And this is all from my side. Over to you, Ollie.
Thank you. Thank you. That was really extremely insightful, Rawan. And I think your lived experience and the direct feedback that you've had from many of those that you work with is so valuable. And I think it really does bring home that link that you've made also with the importance of mental health and well-being in the context of the COVID pandemic and the recovery, and particularly in fragile states such as Syria. I think there might be some elements now that might come up in the next intervention from Katarina. Katarina Popovic, I know, will be looking at a slightly broader picture of education beyond just the early years, but thinking about education as a lifelong process. As the Secretary General of the International Council for Adult Education. Katarina, over to you, please.
Thank you, Ali, and thank to my honorable colleagues who have covered already some very important issues. So I have an opportunity to draw your attention to another part of SDG 4, which is lifelong learning and lifelong learning opportunities for all, an aspect that was a bit neglected in our thinking about education in COVID-19 pandemic and also in the recovery process. So there are 4 main points that I would like to make, and first one refers to adult literacy. We heard a lot about schools closure and how it affected a huge number of learners and students, but we should also keep in mind that literacy courses have been also dramatically affected, and all different type of courses for adults and for older people. And while the school as a stable institutions belonging to the infrastructure tend to recovery and there will be a support, there are already some indications that for adult learning, different type of courses and offers in lifelong learning opportunities will not be so easily re-established. Why is it important to keep that in mind? I will mention, well, just a few reasons. First, we talk about around 800 million fully illiterate people around the globe. When I say fully literate, I mean those who are not able to read or write a single sentence. So how it can affect further areas, so this is really not difficult to imagine. Then the next argument, 2/3 of them are women. And we know already from many cases and researches now even that women and girls were very much affected during COVID pandemic and more excluded from educational existing offers for reasons that were already explained. So the same is valid for adult illiteracy. So 2/3 of them are women. Then literacy is recognized as the entrance door to other sustainable development goals as a precondition for practicing other human rights. So without adult literacy, without addressing this problem of adult illiteracy, it will be really difficult to think or to talk about, to work on achieving other goals, just to mention poverty reduction, for example. And last but not least, let me mention also an economic cost. There is an estimation that adult illiteracy costs global economy more than $1 trillion per year. So there are plenty of reasons, starting with education as a human right for everyone, up to the economic reasons to think about that. So that was my first point. The second point has to do with, well, it was mentioned already, online learning, digital skills, platforms, and so on. Of course, it was the only means that helped us to bridge the gaps in education and learning that we had or still have during the COVID-19 pandemic. And it was very welcome. Luckily, we had this. But there is a very strong tendency now to move most of the education, especially lifelong learning, to the online, to the virtual world. And in adult education, we think it's wrong. Well, not only in adult education, all kinds of, for several reasons. First of all, let's keep in mind, half of the world is not online. So talking about no one left behind, well, we will not be able simply to, in 1 or 2 years of recovery, supply those people with digital skills. And even if we do, the question is, will it be enough really to take full part in using education and learning opportunities? But there is a more important reason, not only for adults, but also for children's school and so on. There are areas of learning and education that cannot be fully covered through the online formats and learning platforms. For example, empowerment, which is very important, increasing motivation to learn, creating a lifelong learning. We want to develop lifelong learners, not only people who have a set of informational skills. Then social emotional learning, which was really, really affected through the COVID-19 pandemic. So also, and keeps to be affected also in online way of learning. Then different kind of vocational trainings where the skills need to be practiced and exercised if you really want people who do have the skills. And finally, a very important reason, I'm glad it was mentioned in the chat box in one of the questions or comments, what about ethics? So I would say ethics and the content, it's still more important what we learn. What is the content, what is the goal, what are the values that we try to transfer or to discuss in our learning than the mean. So online learning is an instrument, it's a mean and not the goal, and that's something that we should keep in mind. There is a tendency, we hear it in many education sessions, we talk about right to connectivity instead of right to education. So connectivity is only a mean. My third point is again about the content, and this is an aspect that is also a bit neglected, I would say, and that's the civic education. We know that during the COVID-19 pandemic, most of the human rights, some of the minority rights and so on, had to be limited. Some of the freedoms had to be limited. But there are already plenty of the researches done by very renewed international organizations, showing that many governments misuse those rights, misused their power, and violated the rights of civic rights, minority rights, and human rights in general. So I believe the task of education, lifelong learning during pandemic, but also after that, is to help people understand and to make the difference. What are the situations where human rights have to be respected by any means, and when they can be limited to a certain extent, to be able to control the government, to make them accountable, but also to be a valuable partner. So education for democratic citizenship, for human rights, for minority rights. And we also see there is a very strong tendency to the kind of, I would call it new nationalism or pandemic-caused nationalism, you know, countries closing the boundaries, limiting the solidarity and contact among the people, some of this with a good reason, but not many of that. We talk also about vaccine nationalism and so on. So the revival of some of the values like solidarity and support and so on, and not taking care only about my, well, whatever it is, village or country or a region. So this should be one of the tasks of the education, the recovery. And my very last point is relatively short because it was already mentioned. It has to do with the need to strengthen public policies, public education, and financing for education. And of course, there are very serious data. Even before the pandemic, UNESCO came up with an estimation that there is a huge gap and we are lagging behind in achieving SDG 4. After the pandemic, the current estimation is, I believe, like a financing gap of $200 million a year for developing countries. So, and the tendency is probably that it will be even more. So what we need is a very strong public financing, even more before the COVID, strengthening of a public education system and responsibility of the state. Those who were excluded from education before the COVID-19, vulnerable groups, different kinds of, those who did not have enough access or who cannot afford for different reasons access to education, life and learning opportunities, they will have even more problems and difficulties after the pandemic. That's why we need a very strong public education and we need strong policies, so very oriented to recovery and resilience, not only recovery like minding the consequences, but also creating the new resiliences and also support to the vulnerable groups if you really want to not to leave anyone behind. Thank you. Oli, back to you.
Thank you, Katarina, and thank you for that very thorough explanation. I think you've also highlighted there the financing gaps, which comes back to the earlier points from Dr. Bofah. So completing the circle, and hopefully now with Hagar, we can hear some final words. And I apologize, time is creeping away. So if we can keep it more or less to 5 or 6 minutes. Hagar is from the Maat for Peace Foundation and is also one of our focal points in the NGO Major Group, has a wide experience across a number of African countries. Hagar, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Oli, and thank you to all the honorable speakers who presented very valuable information about the education in light of COVID. And please allow me to tackle the same topic, education in light of COVID, but from another angle, from a human rights angle. As mentioned, the current situation is that many countries have decided to close schools, colleges, and universities in an attempt to control the spread of coronavirus. But did they know the severe impact of this decision? Well, no, I don't think so. Actually, no one did. But actually, now it appears that these decisions will not be a short-term issue, but can also have a long-term consequences and are likely to increase inequality. So looking at the wider picture, we will see that the COVID effect on education is not only considered as a challenge for SDG 4, but for all 17 SDGs, meaning that it will affect the implementation of the whole 2030 agenda. And if you're asking me how, let me give you some brief examples. We will see the obvious effect, the challenges to target 4.1, which is access to free education. We are talking about challenges on moving education online, but how about minorities, students with disabilities, refugees, those who do not have access to internet and do not obtain electronic devices as mentioned, those who were and are still left behind. How about the vocational education? The vocational education by definition is education that prepares people to work as technicians or take up employment in a skilled craft or trade. How will they manage to get a proper education and training in light of distance learning? Almost 2 years and we still don't know. Moving to the impact of COVID on education on other SDGs. As an example, impacts on target 8.7. Well, children dropping out of school after the pandemic motivated the families to send them to work. After COVID-19, there was a rise by nearly 28% of children aged from 5 to 11 years and 35% of children aged from 12 to 14 years in child labor because of school closures. Of course, when we talk about extra challenges, we mean extra challenges are on females. The pandemic's negative effects gave families a stronger push to accept the early marriages of their girls, which means challenges to target 5.3. The UNICEF stated that 10 million additional girls are at risk of child marriage due to COVID-19, meaning that we do have extra 10 million girls deprived from education. And last but not least, the most dangerous one from my own point of view is child recruitment by terrorist groups. In December 2020, which means a couple of months after the breakout of the pandemic, the UK Counter-Terrorism Referral Unit saw a 7% rise in the volume of terrorist content online that is directed to teenagers. Do you know why? It is because it's their perfect chance to target youth who now have lots of free time after they were always busy by education and exams and school activities. So this is considered as a challenge to target 16.2 and many other examples. So if you're asking me what should we do in order to protect our future from the post-pandemic effects, my answer will be putting education on the top of the list. Education is the key for achieving Agenda 2030 and for leaving no one behind. If I can give quick recommendations, I will give just 3. The first one is implement learning recovery programs. Governments must ensure that students who have fallen behind receive the support that they need to catch up to expected learning targets. Number 2, protect the education budget. To help the most vulnerable students, government should prioritize the directing much of the funds and resources to support schools delivering remote instructions, and particularly if those schools are serving high poverty and high minority populations. And finally, to prepare for future shocks. Well, it's vital that we not only recover from the pandemic, but that we use this experience to become better prepared for future crises. Schools should be better prepared to switch easily between face-to-face and remote learning as needed. Teachers need to be better equipped to manage a wide range of IT devices in the event of future school closures. I know we're running all out of time, but if I can say one final sentence, I will say that the education is the core of the agenda, and any effects on this sector will leave a print in all other sectors. Ollie, I'm back to you.
Thank you so much, Hagar. And I think again you've captured it so well, and you've brought a different dimension there in terms of the potential impacts in terms of the wider development of young people. I think it's extremely strong, and we've had such an amazing panel, and we are running out of time. So I want to make sure we have time now to pass over to Rosario, my colleague, who's been looking at some of the questions. Rosario, perhaps you can summarize some of what's come through, and if there are any final remarks that we might have a few minutes to go back to each of the panelists. Back to you, Rosie.
Thank you very much, Oli. And yes, we have some good questions that have been shared through the Zoom platform and also through WOBA. So I'm going to share 3 questions first, and I will invite the different panelists to jump on and address the different questions as you would like. Okay, so the first question is how, considering the challenges for governance in the different nations, and also the difficult jurisdictions and politics, how to ensure and build and keep an education that is inclusive and equal for everyone? That will be the first one. The second question is related to SDGs. And how or what is the role of education in order to achieve the SDGs, but also how can we make possible that SDGs are included on the formal in the education programs and processes? That's the second question. And then we have a last one, that is how we can prepare the teachers in order to address or respond to these online crises that we are experiencing. Now we have COVID, but in the future we will have other crises that might come. So those are the three questions, and I invite the panelists to join us in order to respond to these different questions. Yes, Katarina.
Since I have already gave an answer, or kind of an answer, to the first one in the chat box, then I will pick the second question, if you allow me to. I've mentioned it briefly, so I would just add a few sentences. So how can education contribute to the SDGs? There are 2 or 3 elements of this answer. First is really lifelong learning also. You know, there is a strong sense of urgency. If you listen in the UN, you know, the report of Secretary General, all the speeches, urgency, the planet cannot wait, climate crisis, and so on. And we forget to educate adults, those who make decisions, those who create policies, and so on. We simply cannot wait for children to finish the school and to take the responsibility. So this is just one of the examples, but I think it could be given also for all the others. So including really everyone. So educating parents, grandparents, neighbors, teachers, of course, a very important group. It has to do with the third question a little bit. And the second question is about the type of education. I think we have been obsessed quite a lot in the last decade or 2 decades with vocational education and training, which is, of course, very important, especially in the context of poverty reduction. But we need to include other elements. We need empowerment for people to, you know, not to only to follow the changes, especially technological changes and the changes in the industry and the economy, but also to take control of their lives, to contribute, to steer also, to take part in the processes, to make decisions and so on, to be active citizens. It has to do also with, you know, peace and interculturalism and this kind of thing. So we need education that will not only serve the need of one sector, which could be economy or another one, but really a holistic approach to education, which will be truly transformative. And I'm calling the last report of Education Commission, The Future Cannot Wait, and the new social contract, which says explicitly, so transformative education. The one that will be holistic and will be include empowering people to change the things to better. So a short answer, but giving a few clues.
Thank you very much, Dr. Katarina. We also have Rawan, and then we have Dr. Richard.
Yeah, indeed. So just like complementing what Dr. Katarina was mentioning about the holistic approach, and maybe I can here highlight the third question about how could we prepare the teachers well. So it's starting really with the holistic approach and ensuring that there is the enough conversations between the parents and caregivers and the teachers to know more about the situations in the houses, what happened in the past period, regardless if they are going again to fully face-to-face or to like a mixed online and face-to-face. Then from the other hand is ensuring the knowledge of the teachers about the protection principles and how could they face maybe some challenges after COVID and how the children are like recovering from certain things other than COVID. So the holistic approach of the knowledge between the education skills and the protection knowledge that will enable them to be prepared more for let's say the approach of engaging with children after.
Thank you very much, Rawan, for this response and for taking this conversation. Then we have Dr. Richard. Dr. Richard, welcome.
Right.
And
okay, thank you very much. So on the part of ensuring inclusive education equality for all, I think the Ghanaian context has been quite interesting and recommendable if others can follow. So here we have a strong decentralized system. So with that one, every society member and every government member is called on board. So no one is left behind. And so what we do is that even throughout the manifesto programs, and anytime a government ascends power, within 2 years, he must come with a coordinated program, bringing out what is necessary for the country. So here, every sector that is relevant and stakeholder is brought on board, and discussion is ongoing. You can even take, we just finished the recent one, we took about almost 2 years. So it's a whole progress. And once we're done at the national level, then it goes down to the local level. So national prepares against whatever is being agreed on by all stakeholders across board. And then the local level also prepare their plans against it. And then there's an annual report system that reporting on progress on all this. And so we can actually tell whether we are making progress or not. And it's very open, there's transparency in the system. So you always have consistent figures being quoted across. Everybody seems to have similar information, and we can be keeping track on that. And currently, it has actually been influencing our political arena in the sense that people are getting more informed, and that changes even their pattern of voting and that thing. So that's what is happening in Ghana. It's very transparent.
Thank you very much, Dr. Richard, yes, for sharing these inputs on the conversation. Then we will go with Avilinia and then Hagar. We have like a few minutes, so we will really thank you if these interventions can be very well on content, but short on time. Thank you very much.
Gracias. Pues solamente quería abonar a la pregunta de, me parece que es la segunda pregunta sobre la educación. Si bien la educación es justo el cuarto objetivo de las ODS de la Agenda 2030, que tiene como objetivo garantizar una educación inclusiva, pues justo lo que se busca o lo que se propone es que se garantice una educación intercultural que contemple las distintas poblaciones de los territorios originarios, en este caso, pues que integre en sus planes de estudio pues la cosmovisión de los pueblos indígenas y que no sea una educación pues meramente occidental, ¿no? Que sea inclusiva y que haya una modificación en su programa educativo. Esa es como la recomendación.
Muchísimas gracias, Avilina, y qué bueno escuchar las voces. Thank you very much, Avilina, and it's very great to hear the voices of youth in this space. Hagar, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Just briefly, I have two successful examples in my mind that I would like to share to answer some of the questions. Well, the first thing is that we have been talking about the challenges of online education and technology and whatsoever. In Italy, the middle school students who received 3 hours of tutoring how to use computers or tablets or smartphones by their own communities saw a 4.7% boost in their performance in some curriculums. So the communities itself would support each other in the technology literacy. And another successful example is that from the governments is that in the UK, they decided to encourage students to remain in schools by paying some incentives such as scholarships and other incentives. And this is a point of protecting the education budget that I was mentioning. The UK was smart enough to cut from the national budget to support the students to go to schools because they know how schools are important. And I guess this is a successful example that should be implemented in conflict countries in the Middle East, especially where we witness high level of illiteracy. So those are just quick examples that I would like to share. Rosario?
Thank you very much, Hagar, for these insights as well and for these recommendations and examples examples from different practices around the world. We are coming to the end of the session, and it's very great to have you all. Some of final remarks or points that we have touched during this session. We need to remember that education is an holistic process, and we really need to work through in order to make education available for all, available having intercultural approaches, but also gender approaches, and making education easy to access for the diverse communities, not only young people, but also older people, to be able to access it and be able to, once they are educated, being able to participate or actively engage in their communities. We need to remember that also civic education is very important, and we need to pay attention to all different communities and groups such as refugees that in this moment are struggling a lot. We have different practices that we have seen not only in Ghana but also in Italy that are showcasing how the governments and also other stakeholders are working towards achieving a better quality of education. But definitely we need to still put an eye on those challenges and work collectively to make education, to make of education this key step in order to achieve sustainable development and ensure that is part of the recovery process, so we can all go back and build back better, leaving no one behind. So thank you very much for everyone. We are only 1 minute after the end of the session. I really want to thank Ollie for this opportunity and all the panelists that joined and also the people who came and shared their questions and contributions through the Bofah platform and also through Zoom. So back to you, Ollie, for the final.
Gracias, Rosario. Thank you so much. I really don't have very much to add. I think you've summarized it so beautifully, and with your own experience in education and youth empowerment, I think you've summarized a number of those key points so well. I just want to thank everyone once more for such an enriching discussion. I've also learned a huge amount from all of you, and I hope that everyone who's been able to join us on WOVA and on Zoom has also found this enriching and useful in your work. We will be sharing the video of this session plus the key messages that have come out from each of the presentations that you've heard. I believe they'll be shared through the WOVA app, and we'll certainly be in touch again in the future. And I encourage you to carry on with the next session that's coming up through the WOVA app. So I hope to see you all again in this forum and in other forums in the future. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Gracias. Hasta luego.
Bye.
Gracias. Ciao.